Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I am your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Well, hello, Judy. Hello, viewers and listeners. Yet again, we have a wonderful interview today. We've just completed it, and we're going to show it to you shortly. And the title we are using for I think the intriguing title we are using for this one is
Psychoproctology, an interview with Jeremy Sherman.
Now, for those of you folks who may not know that particular lingo,
Well,
proctologists
probably most people are not familiar with it.
Well, a proctologist is somebody whose part of whose practice is to look up one's rear end. That's what they're studying and helping people with. Psychoproctology then would be the psychological study of people who are basically, let's use the cleaner term, buttholes or something.
A-holes.
A-holes. And I will note, folks, usually we are PG rated in our language. A few times during this particular interview, we do deviate from that because the terms that Jeremy uses, he uses them quite carefully. In fact, we mentioned George Carlin in the midst of this, and I remembered that my impression of George Carlin, when I first heard his thing about the 7 words you can't say on television. And my overwhelming sense at the time I heard that was, this is a man who loves language. Well, Jeremy is a man also who obviously loves language.
He does. He loves
and
making up words, playing with words.
Very adept
very careful on the use of words.
And a fun guy, and we had a nice time on that. So we will proceed to that very shortly. First of all, we have to do a plug for this podcast. Right. Tell folks, let them know. Review us, please. Do reviews on wherever you got it, and rate us, and that's the rating. Right. Yeah, please rate us on whatever platform you use, because that's how people find out about us. Right. And of course, just plain old tell your friends. If you go to our website, which you'll see up above our heads here, if you're watching us, it's ctin7.com. It's the number 7, ctin7.com, as in couples therapy in 7 words.com, ctin7.com.
Right, the number 7.
If you go to our website, you will be able to also acquire merch. We have our
beautiful mugs in 11-ounce size and 15-ounce size with our beautiful logo on one side and the famous saying on the other side, be kind, don't panic, and have faith.
The 7 words themselves.
The 7 words.
And let's put in a plug also for the book in which I write a lot about the 7 words, and that is
Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back.
There it is, available anywhere books are sold, and you can get the paperback any place. You can get the Kindle version from the Amazon site and also the Audible version where I did the narration, and we hope you will do that. And also, we hope you will review and rate that as well. We're looking for 5-star ratings, of course. But the more folks do that, the more people find out about it. That's how those things work these days. So without further ado, let us move to our interview. You will see the interview. We'll be starting off. Judy will introduce our guest, and then we'll do the interview, and we will see you on the other side. Hope you enjoy it.
Our guest today is Jeremy Sherman. Jeremy describes himself as a normal, informal guy with a colorful vocabulary, infectious humor, and deep scholarship. Tons of content across the sciences and humanities. He holds a master's in public policy and a PhD in decision theory. Together with neuroscientist, biological anthropologist Terence Deacon, Jeremy has been a lead researcher on one of today's most prominent and promising explanations for how mattering emerged from matter, how the struggle for existence emerged from aimless chemistry. He is also a pioneer psychoproctologist, having spent 25 years working to explain total jerks and how to stop them without becoming one yourself. Jeremy, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Thank you. That was more than 7.
Because I just love psychoproctology.
I'm glad to hear it. Yes, I had to choose a very light name for a very serious subject. The diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of butthead behavior is a very serious topic, but you can't take yourself seriously in it. You cannot pretend to be an authority. I've had people say he's an expert on buttheads or assholes. No, I'm a specialist. You can't be an expert on it.
Yeah.
It's very dangerous to claim that you know what distinguishes, how to diagnose them. But
Oh yeah, and that one of the things that when you wrote to us, and in a moment I'm going to be reading for folks the thing you wrote, which is what so intrigued me when I saw your email about, oh, this would be a great guy to have on our program. One of the things that drew me was that I'm in the middle of writing another book, and in this book I'm talking a lot about ideas versus ideologies.
yes.
And one of my favorite shticks is that what happens when ideas harden into ideologies is they become a caricature of the original ideas. There might be ideas that one could argue are good, but when you harden them into ideology, they become, as I say, they can be awful. They can be, worse than caricatures.
Very good point. Yeah.
That certainly fits a lot, I think, with when you talk about the whole concept of, and it's funny, we could talk about the terminology, be it assholes or a-holes, you also talk about, and you in one of your books, you go into a whole bit about ways of finding better terminology. I'm sure you might want to talk about.
Yeah.
In any case, that sort of caught my attention. But
Yeah,
I think
when you said a caricature, it's usually a self-flattering caricature. That is, I think that more than we notice, people subscribe to ideas for the confidence it gives them. It's not so much that they believe the ideas as they relieve through the ideas. That is, there's something affirming.
That's what I mean by ideology. It's when
that's right. So we're on the same page about that. Yeah.
So
an idea can make you feel like a genius, and that's why you buy it. The content doesn't matter.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So I just want to read the email you sent because I think it was just intriguing, and we can kind of take it from there.
Sounds good.
Where it goes. That's okay. So here's what you sent to me. Here's a challenge that interests me regarding intimacy of any kind. To feel safe in intimacy, we wish for total honesty and total kindness. While these two qualities converge during courtship, they are likely to diverge in sustained intimacy. There will be times when it becomes, as the poet Philip Larkin put it, still more difficult to find words both true and kind, or not untrue and not unkind. Now, one could gloss over this distinction, for example, by assuming that since both honesty and kindness are virtues, one should be able to merge them always. But I find more interesting the tension between them and how to manage it. If that interests you, I'd be happy to have a conversation about it. So that's what you sent us.
And here we are.
Yes. Here we are. But we'd be happy to have a conversation about it too. So yeah, can you expand on that a little bit? What are you talking about there?
Yes, in a way, it ties to what we were just talking about a minute ago. We would like to flatter ourselves by assuming that everybody is looking for best ideas. Everybody is reasonable. I call it the veridical stance. We just want the truth. We're weighing ideas on a flat surface. That is, we're not biased in one direction or another. You can hear that in the way that people often talk about, accuse people of bias as though bias is some rare pathology. Yeah. Bias is just fundamental to life. I mean, life is biased towards self-maintenance, and confirmation bias would be a necessary, though problematic, aspect of what goes on for humans. That is, we welcome ideas that make life easier, not ideas that make life harder. So when someone claims to be perfectly open-minded, no, you're not open-minded. You're not as likely to welcome ideas that expose cracks in the foundations of your being as you are to others. So that would also be true, I think, in the mating game. That is, we're after two things in any kind of intimacy. We want a partner who can affirm us, who supports us, who encourages us, who makes life easier. We also want a second opinion, someone who will give us feedback, give us useful feedback and guidance. It can lead to a kind of relationship paradox I think of as, what I love about us is that we can talk about anything provided we don't. So, this shows up in all intimacies. If I go out to lunch with a friend and they ask me how I'm doing, I'll tell them how I'm doing with the ambiguity built right in. I want them to affirm me, so after lunch I can get back to my work with more gusto. And I also want a second opinion. And I can be very ambivalent about which I want. I cannot even know that I want both. And I can be offended if they humor me. And I can be offended if they give me their blunt feedback. So I'm suggesting that one of the essentials for relationship is for both partners to recognize and own that tension.
Mhm.
It becomes very difficult in relationship when one is trying to own it and the other one is assuming that a relationship doesn't involve that tension,
Yeah.
that it should be easier. Why isn't the honeymoon maintained? I've had partners say to me, there's something must be amiss in this relationship. I feel like I have to watch what I say. I'm saying, well, yeah, that's what do you expect? You got two people coming at each other from different directions and trying to maintain intimacy. It's actually 6 love affairs at once. I love you, you love me, I love me, you love you, I love us, you love us. You're juggling a lot.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's
So,
interesting. Yeah.
Now, what were you going to say?
Well, it was just a couple of things. Actually, I want to put a shout out to the post you did in Psychology Today that we'll put the link up when we post this, where you were talking about that ambiguity, you know, that fact that, in fact, what do you refer to as ambigamy? I think is that,
right.
that's a great term, you know, because indeed that concept, first of all, that I should be totally honest implies there's such a thing as what I actually believe all the time. And I like to note the fact that we're actually all a bunch of people walking around. There's a lot of different ways of modeling that.
Right.
I'm fond of Jill Bolte Taylor's 4 characters. If you're familiar with her stuff.
I don't know this stuff.
Yeah, she's the one, she wrote My Stroke of Insight. She did a viral TED
Oh, right.
talk.
Yes, I've heard an interview with her. Yes.
Yeah, and her more recent book last year came out called Whole Brain Living, where she talks about these 4 different characters, you know, that are based on neuroanatomical structures.
Yeah.
And I can relate to that. And I also had a little bit of training in internal family systems, which is based on similar ideas. It's like, you know, none of us is just one individual entity. There's a bunch of us and they have mixed feelings and they have contradictory feelings.
Yes.
So when I'm saying be honest, it depends on who's out front.
Right.
And there isn't such a thing necessarily as how do I feel deep down? I probably feel a bunch of different things deep down.
That's right. And we really tend to simplify that down. And ideology is a way to reinforce that simplicity.
Yes, absolutely.
It's you brand yourself to an idea. It's very much like a branding in that you're going to claim that idea, you represent that idea and that idea represents you. If anybody challenges you, they're challenging this idea. And since it's your duty to defend the idea. So there are all sorts of ways in which we self-simplify that don't work. Another important ingredient here, it should go without saying, but it needs to be said, honesty and realism are very different. That is, honesty and truth are extremely different. You can honestly believe untrue things. This is something that's often overlooked in ideology. You know, for example, the people who say, I love this politician, I love Trump would be an example because he speaks his mind, which means somehow that he's telling truth. That's not, they are orthogonal. They are not the same thing.
That's why I enjoyed your distinction in something of yours I was reading. I think you're quoting someone else, the distinction between lying and bullshitting, which I really enjoyed, because lying, you know, you're telling something that is not true, and bullshitting, you don't care about truth at all.
Right. And we spend a lot of time wondering whether they're crazy or crazy like a fox. You know, but actually I'm paying more and more attention to how animal-like we are in our choice of words. If I'm cornered in some confrontation and I grab out of the air something I have heard that I can say, that I can blurt, that I can bray, that gets me out of the corner, I don't actually have to ever pay attention to what the content of those words mean.
Yeah.
It's just in effect an animal sound that happens to be played out in the way of by means of words. And it's all the more effective if people assume that those words are meant. But so a surprisingly large amount of what we say is not stuff we've thought about. Once again, the veridical stance assumes that I've shopped judiciously, chosen my words carefully with reference to their reference. No, it's often just that sounded good.
Yeah.
That made me sound good.
Yeah, I think it's Jonathan Haidt who talks about this, quoting others as well. I may be mixing up with some stuff I read in Helen Fisher, the anthropologist, but it's the idea that language developed not as a way, the primary evolutionary advantage of language isn't so much conveying information as it is protecting reputation. It's like the reason we talk is to make ourselves look good to ourselves and others,
Right.
more than merely to convey information, which of course we also do.
Right.
And that what you were just saying.
We optionally do it. We convey information, but that's the interesting part. And also words are incredibly squirrely. So I work in a few different arenas. One is the origins of trying, the origins of effort from non-effort, from chemistry. This guy I work with, Terence Deacon, he spent 20 years at Harvard as a neuroscientist working out the evolution of language and how it makes us such a different critter from all other critters. Without language and technology, we'd be just another mid-sized mammal. And so that's a central area of my focus. And while there are lots of predators and parasites in the animal kingdom, there are no assholes. And I think a lot of that is a function of language and the ways in which it makes us both a more anxious species than others and a more delusional or denialist species. As we end up with more anxieties and we end up with more ways to deflect it through language of the sort you're talking about.
Have you watched the George Carlin special?
I haven't seen it yet. Obviously I'm a fan of. I spend a lot of time with comedy. I love it.
He was always so precise with language.
Yes.
You really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
I've got to see it.
The first time it was back in the 90s, I think, was the first time I encountered his 7 words you can't say.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
And I just remember this overwhelming sense of this is a person who loves language. He just loves it.
Yeah.
And that's what he was riffing on. And it was really, and that was true all the way through pretty much.
Yeah. No, words are my favorite playthings. I have lots of toys, but they're my favorite. I'm going to just close the window shade here. I'm getting
Sure. A little sunny.
That's better. All right. Speaking of multiple selves, my first book was called Negotiate with Yourself and Win. And I have a podcast now by that name, which is just me having debates and dialogues with myself. So anyway, so
those can be difficult, right? That's
a
lot of what I work with is people having those debates with themselves.
That's right. No, so it was the subtitle of Negotiate with Yourself and Win was doubt management skills for people who can hear themselves think. So
That's like
everyone does.
Different parts of your brain, somebody's got to win, right?
That's right.
They do. Or what Jill Bolte Taylor talks about is we'll have a brain huddle. Get together and I worked in the course of my career earlier on. I did a lot of work with people who survived trauma, and among those folks were some people with multiple personalities with diagnosis of DID, a dissociative identity disorder. And that was fascinating work because it wasn't, it's like it was an adaptation. It wasn't crazy. It was often difficult to deal with because there were parts of themselves that didn't know about other parts, and they would lose time and things would get very confusing. But it wasn't like a disease. It was an adaptation. And the thing that I think I took from that work more than whatever I did to help them, which I think I helped them to some extent, was how many of me there are. Do you know what I mean? How there's lots of all of us. And I remember this particularly insightful conversation with one of the alters of one of the people I worked with who showed up early on in a session and said, you're in over your head. You shouldn't be doing this with us. And I thought, and she said, and she was polite, but really insightful and incisive, and she was saying, who's your client here? I'm saying you shouldn't do this. And I'm saying, yeah, but the person who brought you here, another alter, thinks you should. And she said, what's the ethics about this? And I thought that was a great question. I didn't have a simple answer. I said, I guess what it boils down to is I have to make a judgment on some level based on my own gut about what I think is the most helpful thing to do here. But it's not a simple question when you have one part saying, and I think with good reason, saying, hey, be careful what you're messing with here, because this system came to be for good reason. And if it falls apart, we go to pieces, literally and figuratively.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was an interesting.
Yeah. On the question of coupling, so I was I had a 17-year marriage. I have 3 children from that. And then after that, I entered the dating world for many years, and ended up coining a term that expressed something that I experienced, but also experienced in others as well. I ended up calling it bipolar ambigamy. Ambigamy, it's not a great term for what I do. I have written 1,000 blog articles for Psychology Today. Very few of them are about anything related to the gametes. I mean, I write some about romance. Those are some of my more popular articles, but a lot of it is about this fundamental tension between romance and skepticism in broader than just partnership. But bipolar ambigamy is insights for the deeply romantic and deeply skeptical. And in partnership, if you've come through a relationship and not come out well, as is often the case, that is, if you come out scathed, hurt, burnt, whatever, you're eager to get back into it, and you're very wary. And you may not see both sides of these. Of this. And if you're on the dating sites, for example, I spent a little time on there, you'll find many people who have just been thrown off the horse of relationship and are eager to get back on, but probably could use a little more quarantine time because they're not quite ready. And I was one of these. I'm not saying that this was something I just observed in others.
Yeah.
Deeply romantic, deeply skeptical, and not able to see those two sides of yourself. So I was I was on dates that were just shocking for the rapid oscillation. There was one date in particular in which I was dumped 7 times and brought back 7 times in the course of one date. She said, no, we're done. And then we ended up in bed. And then the next morning she said, we're done. And I just thought, no, and that would be the natural response. I mean, it's incredibly intense to be partnered with someone.
Yes.
You are putting yourself in a very vulnerable situation on so many different dimensions. And if it works, it's wonderful. And if it doesn't work, it can be disastrous. If it were anything that wasn't in a way subsidized by hormonal certainty, that desire to be in it, we'd be warier than we tend to be about it.
Well, and look, on top of all of that, even when it works wonderfully, then somebody's going to die. Actually, both people.
That's right.
Somebody's probably going to die first, and that sucks. And so, don't love anybody if you can't handle the concept of loss. It's baked in. Right. And isn't that a riot? And I suppose when I use the word faith, one of many ways I can define it. My general definition of faith is accepting that reality is right to be what it is. Not merely that it is what it is, but there's a rightness about it. Religious people would say, well, whatever God means, God is good. That means, right? Because that just means it's right. But you don't have to invoke the supernatural to understand this concept of faith. And that idea, as applied to what I was just talking about, is the idea that says, yeah, isn't that interesting? We all die. And yet there's something joyous about the possibilities before we do that. And that orientation is what I say is what lets people not panic about the very things you're saying. Because of course it's a total panic situation. Either you're worried that it's not going to work, the skeptic, as you point out, I totally relate to that. Maybe you do too, the skepticism involved. We are a second marriage. We're coming up on 18 years together.
Congratulations.
It's funny. I'm one of those people, unlike you, I think, because you had said, I want to draw this out of you now because you said it before we started recording. You are what'd you say you were married to?
I'm happily married to solitude. Yes. I'm glad that my lack of appetite finally caught up with my lack of aptitude. I do not think I'm well designed for partnership in this phase of my life. I mean, I did well. I had a great run, but in that relationship between honesty and affirmation, it turns out that I am happier leaning into honesty these days. It's kind of part of what it's my research life took over in that way. And so I am actually happily married to selectively populated solitude. I have lots of friends, and they are friends without benefits. I find that benefits invariably confuse the friendship. I find friendship honoring and honorable and cleaner in many ways. That is, you don't come at it with this other agenda. I find that even a single kiss implies all sorts of obligations and entitlements, and so I steer clear of that too. And part of that was also me recognizing that I no longer needed that scaffolding in order to keep me an honest man. I'm glad for the rock tumbler that polished me a little bit of all my past partnerships, but this happened to be kind of across the spectrum. I used to need the scaffolding of a teaching position. I used to need the scaffolding of a book contract. I've found that I'm just kind of self-motivated, and I'm a peculiar guy with a peculiar situation. So I'm not recommending this for everyone, but I do think that there's a lot to be said for figuring out whether you really need a relationship. That is, I think, the one thing that makes relationship sustainable. A key to making it sustainable is needing or wanting it compared to the alternatives.
Well, that's what I was going to note about myself. Yeah. I knew, I don't have to go into the story of my first marriage, but I knew when I ended that marriage that I would get married again, though I didn't know we hadn't met. I didn't know to whom, but I just knew I'm wired to be monogamous and involved with someone. And the longer I've worked with folks over the years, I've encountered all kinds of people who seem like, I'm not talking about assholes either. I'm talking about people who are coming to a therapist because they feel bad about hurting other people. Do you know what I mean? Genuinely. But they're hurting other people because they're just not wired for monogamy. They just don't seem to want to be in a relationship, and they're offering, and they're honest about it to the people. It's usually men I'm talking about, talking to women. Right. They're honest to the women, and but they keep breaking their hearts because the woman says, "Oh yeah, that's okay. I'm not really ready for a committed relationship," and they're lying to themselves. Speaking of debating,
that's right.
And then they get hurt, and the guy is thinking, "But I was honest with you. Why? I don't want. I genuinely love you and like you. I don't want to hurt you." There's some people that just don't seem to be wired for it, and it's good to figure that out. I think there's something to it. Though this is a little overgeneralizing. I think that women should trust men who claim undying eternal love as much as men should trust women who claim that they're open to casual relationship. That's right. That concept that you could have such a thing as unconditional eternal love. It's a highly problematic concept. Indeed.
That's right. And that does tie into my general definition of romance. That I think manifests in partnership, but I've been looking for years for an explanation for what exactly we're talking about with romance. I think it is the idea of happily ever after for all eternity. I think that's what we're getting from ideology, from theology, the sense that you can somehow, it's rising like a phoenix, usually from dire situation, because that makes it all the more dramatic that you arrived on a plateau where you are safe and free, rather than living in this reality. Just to touch back on what you're talking about before.
The idea of being safe and free is interesting, because one of the hallmarks, again, I don't remember who I'm quoting here, but one of the hallmarks of eroticism is that there needs to be an obstacle. If you're safe and free, it's going to be boring.
That's right. No, that's right. That's right.
This might be a good segue to go into our letter of the week.
Oh, okay. Wonderful.
Okay.
Let's go for that.
All right. So Katie writes, "Dear Bruce and Judy, I'm a divorced 40-year-old mom of 2 teenage boys. I share custody with my ex-husband who lives not too far away. I've been dating Tom for 3 years, and he moved into my house 10 months ago. He has an 8-year-old son that he has every other weekend. He was never married to his son's mom. Lately, Tom has been very critical of me, my parenting, my clothing choices, my cooking. For example, the other day we were going out to the movies and he said to me, "That outfit may have been fine when everyone was isolating, but not anymore." I was wearing Athleta yoga pants and a t-shirt, which I thought looked nice. We got into an argument about it and ended up missing the movie. My sons, ages 13 and 15, are good kids and generally helpful around the house, but they were having finals and were studying for exams, so they left the dinner table without bringing their dishes to the sink. He started yelling at them, "Get back here and clean up your mess. I'm not your maid." I don't know why he was so mad because I usually do the dishes. I never criticize his son, who, believe me, is a handful. We got into another fight about that. I told him I didn't like the tone he used to talk to my boys, and he said I baby them too much and they have to learn to be responsible. I feel that lately I can't do anything right. I asked Tom if there was something going on that's causing all this criticism lately. He said he's seeing a different side of me since he moved in. I told him I'm seeing a different side of him as well, a side I don't particularly like. My ex-husband was very controlling and demanding. I thought Tom was the opposite while we were dating, but now he's exhibiting the same behaviors. I don't want to make the same mistake again. Are all men like this? I don't know if I should try to work this out with him or just cut my losses. I don't want my boys to think all men should behave this way, but that's what they're seeing from the men in their lives, and I feel responsible. What should I do?
Whoa. So are you posing, so I can voice my interpretations around that if that's what you're suggesting?
Please do.
Yes, we want our guests to do that.
Wow. Wow. Now it's worth thinking a second just to make sure that
Take your time.
no, yeah. So it's on the themes we're talking about, and I generally solve for pattern, recognizing that the particulars matter a lot. The details of the situation are beyond me, even though that's a very well-written letter and detailed letter, but we're hearing one person's opinion about it.
Yeah.
These are the standard problems. I recognize each of those. I've dealt with, yesterday was my birthday and I visited with a former partner of mine. I hadn't seen her in many years. We just got together. I remember the 2 kids that she was raising, and we had exactly that incident where I was feeling like she was mothering them too softly, and I got in trouble for it, and I had to back down and actually had to take them to the candy shop and apologize to the kids. That was part of what was required of me if I was going to navigate my way into this other family. Anyway, it is very hard to juggle kids like this. She finds the 8-year-old a handful. He finds the young teens a handful. We know many people in their 40s who decide that they cannot bring someone into the house with kids that age, because they just have to wait for the kids to grow up before they go back into the dating world. He sounds inappropriate. At the same time, we can imagine his frustration. But this is the frustration that I think results from the romantic honeymoon period. It's very easy to present yourself as different from the last guy. That's actually one of the main courtship rituals I've found is talking about your exes and posturing as though you're a direct contrast to them.
That actually, I consider that a hallmark of the potential rebound relationship.
That's right.
What defines it is if the person you're looking at, from the point of view of the person that you're looking at, you're saying, wow, she or he is at least the anti-ex. So, as opposed to actually seeing them for who they are, which of course takes time and is about disillusion.
Right. But this is, again, the ambiguity about what we're looking for in romance. Part of it is we are looking to ornament ourselves with something flattering. And that is the most intense and juicy part of the courtship thing. There are people who are just chronic in their pursuit of the romantic absolute partner. They're just harvesting the front end of the relationship. They never stick around for the rest. I mean, I would say that must be a large percentage of who's up on Match.com. And as far as they know, they're just romantics.
Yeah, that's a lot of my business.
Yeah, I would bet so.
Chronically
Right.
trying to work it out,
Right. Because the problem with all great ideas is that they eventually degenerate into a lot of hard work. And so I mean, it does sound difficult because what I ended up finding fundamental to any partnership I could pull off was having compatibility in how you negotiate the incompatibilities.
Yeah.
And so I'm listening for that in this letter, and I'm not hearing it so far. There are these incompatibilities. She's reporting on incompatibilities. I trust that those are there. Do they have, when they interact with each other about it, all we've heard is that they both can kind of acknowledge that they're disappointed from their honeymoon vision of each other.
Right.
But the thing that I would say that the thing I'd be looking for vital signs on this relationship is, do they have compatibility in how they negotiate the incompatibilities? And for me, the central piece of that is both of them owning the tensions, both of them owning the ambiguity between that they really want romance and they really want reality.
Yeah.
And if they both have that, then one of them won't simply shift the blame to the other for being too honest or not honest enough.
It's interesting because you just gave me a definition, not perfect because there is no one perfect one, but a really nice definition of what couples therapy is, which is the process by which a third party can help them become compatible in negotiating their incompatibilities.
That's right. That's right. You're cultivating those skills. That would be, if I were doing couples therapy, that's what I would focus on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of many ways of describing it. Yeah. I talk a lot about tolerating the anxiety as opposed to trying to get rid of it, precisely because to recognize the incompatibilities exist inevitably already raises anxiety if what you're looking for is this wonderful romantic ideal.
Right. That's right.
To be able to accept that and then work with it, that's really the stuff of therapy.
Yes, and yet one of the fundamental challenges is how much anxiety to tolerate.
Right.
Obviously. So so you'll get this oscillation between, well, all relationships are hard work, and you should just learn to, you have to learn to absorb so much more. You have to appreciate what a challenge it is to make intimacy work, which can imply at the extreme that any partner is as good as any other.
Yeah,
and that's not, it's not that either, right?
We've talked about that. I could just write a book that just says, find the right person, period.
Right.
It's like,
It works for us.
Right.
That I do think it's probably more complex than that, but that sure is sort of the at baseline. I mean, clearly lots of folks I've worked with come to the conclusion ultimately, I see the problem. We're both fine people, but not for each other.
That's right.
And that's what
There's
happens.
a lot to be said for that. A lot to be said for that. There's a joke related to this. It's a guy who decides he's going to go out and find the woman of his dreams. And he searches for a year, and his friends don't see him. He's moved all around the world looking for the woman of his dreams. And they find him in the cafe, sitting there all dejected. And they say, so you're back. Did you find the woman of your dreams? Yeah, I found her. So why are you so dejected? Because she's looking for the man of her dreams.
Bingo.
That you're going to say it turned out to be a nightmare.
No. No, there's a lot. There's an awful lot to interlock to make it work well, but also a lot to be said for a kind of benign neglect which would be a way of handling the anxiety. Another one of the assumptions, the romantic assumptions, is that you can be intimate about everything always.
Yeah.
And I think you got three things. You got your compatibilities, your capacity to negotiate your incompatibilities, and your space taking. And everybody I talk to who's in a healthy relationship, a sustained relationship, the space taking is really important, including psychic space taking.
Mhm.
I mean, one of the ways in which I feel like I no longer have the competence that, when I say I'm glad that my lack of appetite finally caught up with my lack of aptitude, I'm not great at the stoic silence that I think is useful in relationship, where you just let things roll off your back.
Yeah.
And in fact, I would end up in relationships with women who knew that I was paying a lot of attention to my ideas, and we would just get in this habit where they would provoke me for attention. Because at least they were getting my passionate attention
Right.
when they would provoke me, and it just became an addictive habit. It was hard for us to drop out of that.
Yeah. It's interesting you pointing out, sometimes you just get past it. I just saw an article in the New York Times a week or two ago that quoted, and it had a link to a study that was done. A little leery of the study because I think it was coming from a particular kind of religious perspective, whatever. But what they were pointing out was the research they were doing with people who had divorced was that, and then people who had also rated their marriages as unhappy but hadn't divorced. And they followed them up years later. And 5 years later, they found that a large majority of the people who were unhappy 5 years before and stayed together were not unhappy anymore. They were saying they were in happy marriages. And a large percentage of the people who did divorce weren't any happier for having divorced. Now, again, I know all kinds of exceptions to all of that.
Right.
But it's an interesting comment on that idea. Yeah, sometimes it's funny when people will say this in sessions. Almost always the woman will say, in a heterosexual couple will say, we just have to talk about it. And sometimes I'll say, well, that's a premise you're making, but let's look at that. Because maybe sometimes just talking about it isn't the thing to do. Maybe sometimes just not talking about it works too. And and I'm in the talking about it business, so obviously I have a bias on that.
No, but congratulations for noticing that, because no, I had a lot of therapy, and I was a child of the encounter group movement.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, my parents got deep into it, and I did all of that, and it was actually the first way I could get women's attention was by a capacity to name more than two emotions. So I really leaned into it, and it took me years of relationships where by the end we were processing so much that if we had invested that attention in another way, we could have designed an entire municipal airport. I mean, it was really a lot of fuss. We were doing a whole lot of fuss. And it took me a while. It took me the longest time to stop being that hypersensitive guy who thought you could process your way through to perfect harmony. That was just a function of this era I came through. And so I've cultivated greater inertness. And that was actually one of the goals in my relationships, was just to get better at it. I'm still too high strung to count on me for much of it. I can let stuff slide 2 or 3 times, but the 4th time I'm bound to talk about it. I just got very mouthy is what I'm saying. But I do think that there's a whole lot to be said, and hats off to you as a talk therapist for not assuming that talk therapy solves everything.
Oh yeah, I'm all about often, I'm a great lover of paradox, and I'm also a great, so let's talk about how not talking about it is sometimes a good thing.
Yeah, that's right.
And I also a great lover of sort of, well, let's look at the assumption. It's not like they're inherently bad, but don't just assume things without thinking about it, because sometimes those assumptions are causing part of the problem.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. Yes.
Well, thank you for doing this. This has been
Thank
delightful.
you for having me. Thank you very much.
Did we covered with you?
What's that?
Is there anything that you'd like to talk about that we haven't covered before we wrap up?
Well, I want to make sure that we did justice to that letter. I guess I would say the thing that I wanted to make clear there was that thing about what you're looking for. The hardest part is compatibility and how you negotiate the incompatibilities. And that also would include compatibility in acceptance of space taking.
Mm.
And that's difficult because in relationships, space taking can feel like intimations of splitting up.
Yeah.
For example, if you're in a partnership, one solution for them, it's getting popular in Berkeley, is for the couple to live in different homes.
Mhm.
Well, that's often a sane way to handle it if you've got two families you're trying to blend. Well, is that stigmatized? Because that feels like a parting. One way to think about what's going on in a relationship is you court briefly, and then you surge to merge.
Mm.
And all of the joy comes from loving each other more intensely, and then you find yourself up in each other's thing way deep.
Mhm.
And any kind of calibration back is a little bit risky because the entire buzz came from every day being more and more into each other.
Mhm.
So just how you manage that is an interesting challenge. Yeah, that's as good a place to end it as anywhere. Just thinking about that, whether you want it, recognizing that that's what you're going to do, and faith in reality. From my perspective, is I hold no higher God than reality. I shall not put any God higher than reality. Whether reality is right or wrong, that is, whether I like it or not, remains an important issue because I have to figure out how to bring about right and wrong. But I do know it wins.
Mhm.
No, reality wins in
Absolutely,
the end.
yeah.
So
Yeah, and
that's my faith in it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting because when I'm saying right, it's not so much right as wrong as opposed, in terms of is that actually reality or isn't it? I'm saying, no, what reality is about science, not faith per se.
Yeah.
Like that'll take you wherever it takes you. But faith when I say right, I mean in the sense of I'm going to adopt an attitude that rather than fight with it, I'm going to work with it. And there's something good about it, and that just changes how I interact with everything to the extent I say, well, okay, it's fundamentally good, even when I can't understand it. It's painful. I don't get it. I wish it weren't that way.
Yeah.
Well,
I like this line from the Tao. The master makes use of all circumstances. Now, I don't think the master tries to. It's not like there's a formula by which you can make use of it. But how to find what's good for you, what's good for the world, in the world does feel that rightness matters to me a lot. Figuring out what to make good about it.
Right.
All right.
Thank you very much. Much
Thank
Thank you.
Jeremy.
It was a pleasure to be with you too.
It's so nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Likewise. And take care.
Bye-bye.
Well, that was a lot of fun. We hope you enjoyed that as much as we did.
He's a really neat guy.
He is a fun guy.
And it was,
Got some
this
great
is,
ideas.
yeah, it's, I think this is the first interview we've done where I just figured he sent us such a great intro. He said, this is what I'm really kind of interested in talking about. He obviously had picked up on what we talk about.
Right,
And it was kind of neat. So we enjoyed that. And we've got a bunch of guests signed up already.
We do.
And more.
Right. So if you'd like to be a guest on our show, you can contact us the way Jeremy did. You can go to our website, ctn7.com, or write either one of us, Bruce at ctn7.com or Judy at ctn7.com. Or, like I just said, go to the website. And if you have a listener question that you would like us or possibly one of our guests to answer, you can write to us the same way.
Yeah, and when you go to that website, ctn7.com, you will also see if you want to suggest yourself, especially as a guest, you can actually sign up for a time. It's tied into our calendar, and so you can actually see what the available times are. We usually record on Fridays. I think those are the times you can sign up for. Yeah. If you want to be on the show and can't do a Friday, write to us anyway, because we can often accommodate that.
We can accommodate.
Yep.
Okay.
And let's put in another plug. Well, of course, plug for the podcast. Please tell folks about the podcast. Rate us, like us, subscribe to us, do all that other kind of good stuff.
Share us. Let your friends know.
Absolutely. And another plug for the book, which is
Reigniting the Spark: Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back.
Yes, available anywhere books are sold. And as I've been saying of late and continue to say, I'm working on another one, folks, although don't hold your breath. Get a hold of the first one first, because it'll be
It'll be a while before the next
It'll be a
one
while
comes
for the
out.
next one, and moreover, it'll be great to have read the first one to really appreciate the second, although it'll stand on its own also. So I think we've covered what we need to cover.
I think we have.
Well, great. And so until next time,
Remember, be kind
don't panic.
and have faith.